How marvelous, how wonderful, thus my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. Is that your testimony? Amen. I'm so grateful to our music department for always setting the stage and for always ushering in God's presence. I'm so happy to see everybody here today. Just hearing amen and seeing your faces, it already makes today a very special one. Actually, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this moment to say thank you. It was a couple of weeks ago that we had a few people in church, a few people online, to participate in what was a big day for me. So I appreciate the role that this church has played in my own development and in just growing and whatnot. So I appreciate this church, and I'll often say the church, but it's the people who make up the church. So I appreciate each one of you. I can't say thank you enough. So once again, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Not your time to thank me, Pastor Rob. I think there's a word from the Lord today. It comes from Luke chapter 17. I appreciate Zavai for reading it so well. I'll read it in your hearing, and then we'll see what God has for us. But it says, on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him, keeping their distance. They called out, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. As you already know, by looking at the screen, I'm going to look at this text from the perspective or the angle as the world turns. Our Father and our God, we're so grateful today for the chance to be back in this place. We are more than excited to see so many faces and to feel your presence here as it has not been felt in some time. We're always grateful for singers up front, but to have singers behind us and next to us, it just reminds us of just how wonderful and marvelous you are and the love you have for us. So God, we've already felt you through the songs. We have been given a lesson with the story, and we're asking now that in the preaching moment, you would not leave us disappointed. So whatever are my shortcomings or my own frailties, please don't punish your people because of them. So God, let me get out of the way, because ultimately it's your thing, so do with it as you will. We love you, and we thank you for what you're going to do in this place. In Christ's name, amen. I love The Lion King. It's not anything to laugh at. All things The Lion King, I am here for. Like, in 1994, when the movie came out, I was here for The Circle of Life. I could sing it with the best of them. I appreciate it. I just can't wait to be king, even though Simba was a little obnoxious. I did really enjoy Be Prepared. Scar is my favorite character. I will not lie to you. You can say what you want, but that's fine. It's my sermon. I like Scar. Of course, Hakuna Matata is a great song. In 1997, when it went to Broadway and then to the Pantages Theater, I remember my aunt taking us, and I was so happy to get dressed up, not because I was going to the Pantages, but because we were going to see The Lion King. And to see the people, doing all the things, singing all the songs, the acting, it was a wonderful experience. I remember in 2019, when the live film came out, or I guess not the live film, they're not real lions, but the one that looked very, very real. I remember being so excited, I began watching the Discovery Channel even more just to look at lions in my anticipation of what was happening. Like, I could not wait. I was beyond excited. I think I caught it at least 3 times in theaters because I love The Lion King. Now, it was the great psalmist of Pride Rock, Timon, who said, I can see what's happening. And you know the song that he goes into as far as it's the main one from the film, but he's observing the happenings of the world around him, and he's putting pieces together as to the pending changes that are coming. And to be sure, I am no meerkat, but as I look around the world today, I can see what's happening. I am sure that you do indeed have a clue, but as we look at unmasked gatherings that have increased. There was a time before it was, no, we're not going to even hang out. Now it's, hey, let's hang out, and hey, this is actually going to be an unmasked event. So if you're not vaccinated, you might want to stay home. When I look at sports arenas, at least in California, they're starting to be filled up again, at least with the NBA. You can see that there are some changes that are around the corner. And you see that, that some of these arenas are even filled to capacity. When I look at gas prices, a year ago, no one was going anywhere, mercy. And now, you see that summer's here, people are about to hit the road again. And when I look at even just last weekend for the long weekend, or the holiday weekend, $97 million as far as people spent on tickets going to movie theaters. This wasn't on popcorn. This wasn't on the at home as far as renting movies. This was going to theaters. There was an article saying that the movie industry is back, or is it? And so as we see a decline in deaths, we see new cases and a decline in percent positivity, I would say that we're turning a corner. With 52% of Californians vaccinated, I would say that we're turning a corner, at least fully vaccinated. There's, I think, 12.5% that are partially vaccinated, according to California's website. And so we're still on track to fully reopen as a state come June 15. Now, after 15 months, discussion has moved from, if I get sick, will I have a ventilator, to now we have a whole lot of vaccination doses going unused. We've gone from make sure you wear a mask to there will be no more mandates in just about 10 short days. Slowly tilting, slowly turning the corner into the next normal. And if I'm honest, I have slightly mixed emotions. Don't get me wrong, I do want some things to go back to the way they used to be. This morning, there was an excitement in the parking lot that I haven't felt in a very long time. My goodness, there was an energy. Talking to Pastor Rob, even today, are we ready for this? There's an energy in here that we have not felt for some time. I've missed meeting with family and friends without concerns about who I might endanger or how they might endanger me. There are a lot of things I'm excited to jump back into, but even as many applaud this pending turn, I can't help but think that with all that we've lost over this period, I wonder if we've learned all that we need to have learned in this season before we move forward into our next normal. To be honest, there was some political pressure applied or being felt, when the date was initially announced. Things have changed since then, but, it wasn't exactly following the science when it was announced initially. But either way, while I'm glad that this extended season of physically distancing from one another is coming to a conclusion, I am still asking God to show me what I must be mindful of as the world turns. And I suspect that that is the question on the hearts of those 10 lepers that we encounter in Luke chapter 17. At the time of our text, Jesus and those who have followed him are on the move after a series of teachings that Jesus has provided, teachings that were designed to express God's heart for the lost and to kind of expose God's critique for the religious leaders. Jesus is now headed towards Jerusalem, and when we get to our verse, he and his group of followers are moving along the region between Jewish-centered Galilee and the region of Samaria. They're at the border. While on the way, Jesus encounters 10 men on the outskirts of the town, begging of him to assist with their condition. Now, we don't know too much about these men. Their names are not given. We don't know what they did for work. But we do know that they're on the outskirts of the village because they have all tested positive for leprosy. Leprosy, as you know, was a debilitating and contagious disease, and it would affect the peripheral nervous system, and it would cause painful boils and scars. And lepers could lose their senses, and in extreme cases, body parts could fall off because people were not aware of when they had been injured, and then it was a terrible disease. And in an attempt to stop the spread, the ancient world had a number of mandates put in place by the law in order to ensure the safety of the general population. The lepers had to remain socially distanced from the people. According to Levitical law, they were required to remain about 50 paces or so So when passing by somebody. So 6 feet, that was nothing. 50 feet? I mean, that seems pretty bad. To stop the spread, lepers were required to quarantine away from family and friends, often living in isolated communities with other lepers on the outskirts of their home region or of their village. And to stop the spread, lepers had to remain distanced from others until they could prove that they had been cured and they had been deemed clean ceremonially by a priest. So when Jesus finds these 10 men, they are practicing social distancing. They are being afflicted by this disease and seeking any kind of relief that they can so they can have their lives put back on track, so they can go back to the lives that they once knew. Without touching or even approaching them, Jesus turns their world around, telling them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." And as they do, Jesus' voice seems to serve as a divine cure. Before they could even get to the priest to confirm the results, to affirm them and saying, "Okay, you're now clean," they were all healed and restored, thus able to go back into the world and lifestyles that they once knew. And the majority seemed to head out full steam ahead, looking to hit the Galilean Mall, maybe to secure reservations at their favorite restaurant, or on their way to secure tickets for the upcoming season of their favorite Galilean basketball team. Based off of the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee, which Luke calls Lake Gennesaret, I would assume that the Galilean basketball team of that day was named after a body of water. It's in the Bible. I don't know. I mean, it was the Lakers, guys, come on. But one of them, who was a Samaritan, decides to turn around, opting to go back and thank Jesus. So what? What's the point of all this? What can we learn from antiquity about socially distancing from one another, or lessons that we can learn before going back into society? As always, those are such great questions, and I'm glad you're back in here to ask them. I think that if we examine the interaction between Jesus, the Samaritan, and the 9 other lepers of the text, whose world has been turned back to normal, that we can leave our time together with a sense of how we should move forward as the world turns. And full disclosure, the Bible does not say explicitly that the other 9 were Jewish. People often assume that. I don't want to make any assumptions on the text. I do like to handle the Bible with care. It only says that this one was a Samaritan. By implication, though, we can presume that at least a couple of them were Jewish because of the way that it's talked about as far as this person. Just putting that out there to know that, that we do want to pull things out of the text. And also, if I say that, anything that I say, you have to say amen to because it would have grown out of the text. So, you know that it's being handled with a decent amount of care. But the first thing that the text teaches me is that when the world turns, that there is still a need to participate. It's been a while. Can somebody say participate? Participation. There is power in our collective voices. The text says, on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him, keeping their distance. They called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. I appreciate the strategy and the tactics of these 10 lepers that end up sparking a change in the world and transforming their condition. The group of individuals had, for an undisclosed amount of time, been living in isolation, quarantined and physically distanced from friends and family. They have been regulated to the outskirts of society due to their condition. They've been forced into isolation. They had to deal with the actual sickness on one hand, but they also had to deal with the stigma of being sick. How did they catch that? What did they do? How reckless were they living? Who were they hanging out with? God must be punishing them, because I didn't get anything. I was just with them last week. I can only imagine the kinds of conversations that these lepers had amongst themselves. Can you hear them as a community having panel discussions on first century clubhouse chats about the different treatments that they were receiving because of their skin? We don't know how long they had been on the border of Galilee and Samaria, but I imagine that if it had been a while, that some began to wonder, could their condition ever be changed? Would things ever get better for lepers like them? To heal leprosy, it takes about 1.5 to 2 years even today. So you can imagine how long somebody might be wondering, how long will it be like this? And as they're dealing with the effects of isolation and their personal responsibility of stopping the spread, something amazing happens. Jesus walks on by. And we don't know how they recognized him. Maybe they saw him work in the lives of others. Maybe they just got word that there was somebody who could do something. However it was, somebody recognizes that there's somebody coming with the power to transform their entire situation. But the text says that they are situated at a distance required by Levitical law. And someone amongst them is smart enough to say, if one of us cries out on our own, we may not have enough power or volume to get the desired attention. But if we can come together, if we can utilize our voices in unison, then maybe we'll be able to get the attention of one who has the power to make the change that we're looking for. They begin to call out together. Their collective voices are enough to get the attention of Jesus. If you notice in the text, it says he was coming, but he didn't notice them until they called out. As they go, their worlds were turned around as their sickness was cleansed and the change that they were looking for was achieved. Ultimately, it was the power of Christ connected with the persistence of their collective cries for change, that allows them to see what they could have only dreamt about in a previous season. And while this is a beautiful thing for the lepers in the text, my hope is that the awesomeness of the miracle will not make us forget their methodology. That the power of Christ, linked with the persistent cries of those willing to participate, willing to call out in a collective voice, it led to a powerful change. I imagine that now that their immediate needs had been met, now that the immediate goal of the group has been accomplished, that they were tempted to go their separate ways and resume their individual lives and champion their individual cares, forgetting the power of their collective voices, forgetting the power of the unified voices. But I want to encourage us today, as we are starting to see the world turn in our own lives and in the lives of this state and of this country, not to forget the lessons that we learned or were reminded of while sheltering in place, the importance of participation and the power of a unified voice. Let's remember the power that we tapped into during our own time of social distancing when we used a collective voice. That's what I saw in November, when people showed up in record numbers on both sides to elect officials from the local level all the way to the highest office in the land. That's what we saw last June when teachers at Miramonte, who are members of this very church, led a young people's march for justice and change that started in Cuesta Park and concluded at the Mountain View Police Department, even at the chagrin of conference administrators. Even when people said, no, we really don't want this to happen. But you know what, but with them saying, look, we hear what you're saying, but it's more important to show our young people what happens when we come together. On a positive note, we can affect positive change. And you know what happened? Even after saying unequivocally that Black Lives Matter, the police department sends a thank you letter to our principal saying that they were blessed and that they felt like they had been affirmed by those who went out that day. There's something that happens when we participate and when we come together, powered with Christ. And as the world turns, as we begin to see changes in our individual bodies and changes in our own accessibility, freeing us from some of the restrictions that forced us into community in a different way, our goal is not to get complacent with one miracle. One relatively successful campaign to test and vaccinate people in the hope of stopping the spread. One conviction in the case of a former police officer. One election to unseat a powerful, divisive political figure. But we have to hold on to the truth of the principle so that we can push for more change through the power of Christ and the persistent cries of a collective people. Maybe we're similar, and we're grateful, but we're not satisfied. I'm glad that cases are decreasing and vaccines are proving effective, but I'm not satisfied, not with only half of the state vaccinated. I'm grateful that a public servant whose job it is to serve and protect has been held accountable in such a public way, but I'm not satisfied. I'm grateful that there seems to be a pause or at least a reduction in some of the extreme political theater that we've been subjected to, but I'm not satisfied. Because we're still captive to a capitalistic system that values profit over people. There are still families living without a living wage and adequate health care. There are still children navigating life living in food deserts. There are still families overseas ravaged by war and apartheid. There is still a deteriorating educational system that's failing a number of children. Policing and prison systems that still require change. And the church, even the Seventh-day Adventist Church, even the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Central California Conference is in need of a revival. People are still in need of a transformative connection with God. So don't be satisfied as the world turns, but let's use the power of our collective voices in partnership with Christ to get everything we want to see. Let's stay united until we experience the change that we know needs to take place. The saying goes, we're stronger together. We're better together. And as the world turns, we must continue to participate, using the power of our collective voices, operating in unison and one accord in partnership with the power of Christ. But secondly, as the world turns, we have to decide what we're going to cultivate. Can somebody say cultivate? Cultivation. Where will we improve or develop or grow or maintain? The text says, when he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Now, though these men used their collective voices to partner with Jesus for the change they wanted, their praise for the great thing that God does for them is much more individualistic in nature. Only one of them, seeing that he is healed, comes back, praises God in a loud voice, and throws himself at the feet of Jesus and thanks him. And then Luke adds a detail that helps to color the power of the scene for us. And he was a Samaritan. Now, we've talked about this before in a sermon the church has left the building about Jews and Samaritans and, even the parable of the Good Samaritan, like there's only one, or, when it comes to Jesus interacting with the one at the well. But it might not mean much to us, but this is a fact that back then would have made them clutch their pearls. Like, this is a shocking revelation in the story. Even though Jews and Samaritans were neighbors, they would not have ordinarily or voluntarily had any communication, or at least not any pleasant communication with each other. And though both of these groups traced their heritage and their lineage back to Israel, and they held the Torah in high regard, there were nuances in the ways that they lived, the ways that they worshiped, that said, you know what, we just can't get along. There were cultural identities that caused them to disassociate from one another, judge one another, hate on one another, and to build walls and barriers that prevented communication and engagement, barriers that stood for generations. And it seems to me that what brings a Samaritan into a productive partnership with these other 9 men or lepers and a Jewish Christ is necessity. This disease and being quarantined together because of it forced this Jewish man, or this Samaritan man, and these other lepers, some who probably were Jewish, to break down long-standing and deeply rooted walls and barriers of communication, long-standing traditions, long-standing lifestyles for the sake of their survival, at least in the season of quarantine. Now, once again, like I said, it doesn't say that 9 of them were Jewish, but by implication, we can say for sure that a couple of them were. But this is what makes the Samaritan's return to Jesus so special. Now that he has developed his antibodies and has been cleansed, he no longer needs to be in communication with any Jew for survival's sake. He has the option post-quarantine of simply going back home and rebuilding what his people would have seen as a natural or normative, maybe even needed way of life that existed prior to his quarantine experience. But there's something about what he has experienced in quarantine, something about his experience with Jesus that brought him out of quarantine that won't allow him to redevelop or reinvest in the personal and societal norms or the walls that he may have operated with before. he comes back to Jesus, this Jew of Galilee, and he has honored him, falling at his feet and thanking him for the great change that has come over him. And maybe, just maybe, the irony of affliction for this man, and even for some of us as the world is beginning to turn back to a sense of pre-quarantine life, is that in the season of physical distancing, of social distancing, that some well-established or long-held traditions, routines, lifestyles, ideologies have been broken down. And they broke down, and they've bettered us. And ultimately, it would be for our betterment if we allowed them to stay that way, as far as broken. Some of us have had oversaturated schedules for way too long, but those got broken down during quarantine. Some of us had insane itineraries, but those things got broken down during quarantine. The habit of spending however so much money eating out when there was groceries at home. I'm preaching to myself. That got broken down during quarantine. You know, the addiction or reliance on retail therapy has been broken down, or at least shifted to Amazon during quarantine. But that window side-only view of what's going on in the lives of your children or your partner has broken down during quarantine. There were some unhealthy partnerships, relationships, situationships, if you know what those are, that were broken down during quarantine. Some harmful habits that were broken down, some triggers that were broken down during quarantine. And the notion that Sunnyvale can only do ministry on the weekend, that has been broken down during quarantine. But if we're not careful, as the world turns, and as there comes to be an end of some of our mandated modes of operation, as those things are lifted, we may be tempted to go back and cultivate or reinvest in some unhealthy boundaries, some barriers, ideas, or relationships, or habits, or tendencies that kept us from taking that next step with God, that kept us divided from the fullness of life and on the other side of quarantine. I believe that God is saying that we shouldn't wreck the work that God has done in some of us, probably a lot of us, during this season. And I don't believe that God caused the pandemic. I don't believe that God wanted the pandemic, but I do believe that God has worked some things for our betterment with the pandemic, or through the pandemic. And I think that if we go back to all the norms we had before, all of our ways of life, that we would be undoing some of the things that God has allowed to develop in us. My hope is that we would establish that we will never be the same again. If you've been going for a walk with your spouse in the evening, something that you didn't do before, don't stop that just because the world is reopening. If you found yourself starting to exercise more and getting out more, going for a bike ride all of a sudden, you didn't have them before, don't stop that now that you have more options and you can do other things. You know, if you've made extra time for your devotional life or for inspirational reading because, what else are you going to do? You're at home all day. Do not stop that because we're going back to our next normal. Whatever God has done for you or in you, cultivate that thing. Let that thing continue to grow. That's what the Samaritan does. He doesn't have to go back to Jesus. He doesn't have any need to be in relationship with Jewish people. But even though that necessity is no longer here, he does it. As the world turns, we must continue to participate, using the power of our collective voices, operating in unison, in one accord, in partnership with Christ. But secondly, as the world turns, we have to decide what we're going to cultivate, because there will be a temptation to build back some things that are broken down. And finally, as the world turns, we're going to have to resolve to appreciate. Can somebody say appreciate? We have to be thankful even in the gray. Participate, cultivate, appreciate. If you've got that, you've got the sermon. You can preach it yourself the next time. We have to be thankful even in gray areas. What are you talking about? Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. Now, I've always liked this text because I'm a person who was raised on the power of gratitude. So when something good happens in our lives that causes our world to turn, the appropriate response is to give thanksgiving. When somebody does something nice for you that benefits you or blesses you, it's only right that you tell them thank you. When the church has accepted you, you say thank you. When a church has consoled you as you've grieved personal losses that were that are very close, you say thank you. When a church has celebrated with you on, birthdays or special occasions, you say thank you. Do you hear me building a rhythm? When a church has helped you develop a crew of people and has made this place home, you say thank you. When a church when a church shows maturity and vows to not tease anybody about the playoffs that happened with the Lakers, you say thank you in advance because they've been sanctified and they know that would be a little too close to home. It's a little too soon. Thank you. So I'm of the opinion that Jesus is fully within his right, after partnering with the persistent cries of the collective voices of 10 men, after he himself has broken down societal norms and barriers and blesses the Samaritan and the 9 people with him, allowing them the opportunity to re-enter society and enjoy the next normal. Jesus is fully within his rights to feel some type of way that only one of them returns to say thanks. The others didn't channel their inner Dave and Amelia and Ben talking about, what can I do for you? You have done so much. They just sit there and go on about their business. But the thing that really hits it is that the one who says thank you is the foreigner of the group. Over the years, scholars have debated what is behind Jesus' inclusion of the fact that this man is a foreigner. It's the kind of debate that I love, but it doesn't preach very well, and it would take us far over our allotted time. But I would like to suggest that maybe part of the significance of Jesus' designation of the Samaritan as a foreigner is to provide us with some geography that will help influence our theology. That maybe there is a clue that the miracle occurs closer to the Galilean side of the Jewish of the border, as opposed to the Samaritan side. I promise I'm going somewhere. If that's the case, and if this is where these men have been stationed for this time, then the one who returned to say thank you is likely the one who has experienced this season of quarantine the furthest away from home. He is, by implication, the most disconnected from the normalcy of life that he had before he caught this disease. Don't forget, there's no internet, there's no subscription of the Samaritan Times that can be delivered in a leper colony outside of Galilee. This is before the age of FMLA, so there's no telling what has become of his job, what has become of his business, or if he even still has a business to go back to, or a job to hold on to. There's no telling if his family or his village has remained secure during this extended season of quarantine. And truthfully, while he has been healed by Jesus of Nazareth, a historic city in Galilee, he may not know too much about Jesus either. He may not have heard of the miracles of Jesus in Samaria. So how can he be sure of Jesus' healing practices? After all, the healing had come kind of quickly. It normally took 1.5 to 2 years to have it done. Will this healing stick? What are the long-term effects of Jesus' healing? And while this healing is the one he receives, grants him the ability to go home, he likely faces the uncertainty of the state of the home he might return to. It grants him the ability to go back to normal. But what will this new normal look like for this man? It's a gray area. Even with the antibodies that he has, even with the healing that's taking place, things are still not particularly clear for him. Things aren't so black and white for this guy. The future in front of him is gray. He might have more uncertainty and questions than he really has answers for. But even in the face of grayness of the future ahead of him, he has enough gratitude about the demonstration of God's power in the present to say, I'll worry about what's coming later. As for right now, in this moment, I've got to stop, I've got to go back, and I've got to give God for where I am currently. And in our own experience, as the world turns closer to what was, just as sure as there are lots of people celebrating for things starting to turn around, there is an abundance of people that have real uncertainty about what awaits them on the other side. Maybe the situation with your job or your business still looks gray. Maybe your retirement or your 401k, it still looks a little gray. Maybe your relationship status, after all these months locked up together, looks gray. Maybe your health situation, it looks a little gray. Whatever the gray is, we may not know what tomorrow holds, but I'm so glad that we know who holds tomorrow. The song says, I have a maker. He formed my heart. Before even time began, my life was in his hands. I have a father. He calls me his own. He'll never leave me, no matter where I go. He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls, and he hears me when I call. He knows your name. He knows your every thought. He sees all those tears that fall, and he hears you when you call. He sees you. He sees me. He hears you, and he hears me. And we have the promise that he'll go with us wherever we go. David said, you go before me and you follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Jesus said, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. The promise to Moses was, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. The promise to Joshua was, be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified, do not be dismayed, because the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go, even in the gray area. Jesus said, lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, even in the midst of gray areas. So we can be grateful, even if there is gray area, because we know that God's going with us. We may not know what tomorrow holds, but once again, we know who holds tomorrow. So let's commit to participation. Let's be mindful about our cultivation, and let's resolve to show appreciation, even as the world turns.